الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In this week's lesson we will be looking at the section entitled in Arabic as Babun Nawafil, which in English means the section with regards to the optional prayers. Now, as we looked at before, there are prayers which are considered to be farz. The 5 daily prayers, they are considered to be farz. Similarly, a section which we are going to look at later, the Jummah section, that is farz, that is obligatory for men, for those who are sane, for those who are mature, and for those who are able to come. Eid Salah, as we're going to look at later, is considered to be wajib and obligatory. However, besides these prayers, there are many more other prayers which are considered to be sunnah, which are considered to be optional. And these sunnah prayers or optional prayers are split into 2 categories. The first is called sunnat-e muakkada, emphasize sunnah, and the second are called sunnat-e ghair muakkada, which are sunnahs which are not emphasized by the Sharia, or to be more precise, by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, emphasized sunnahs, are those sunnah prayers which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged, or those prayers which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regularly and continuously performed and continuously did. And sunnat-e ghair muakkadas are those sunnahs or those prayers which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam may have encouraged, may have said a few ahadith or a few sayings with regards to the virtue of this particular prayer, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regularly himself did not pray. Those prayers, those sunnahs, are known as sunnat-e ghair muakkada. Now, a question recently a brother asked me is, what's the difference between nafil and sunnat-e ghair muakkada? What's the difference between optional prayers and sunnah prayers which are not emphasized by the Sharia, i.e. sunnat-e ghair muakkada? Now, it's mentioned in Aapke Masail Aur Unka Hal, written by Maulana Yusuf Ludhianvi rahmatullah alayh, that the difference between sunnat-e ghair muakkada and nafil prayers is that sunnat-e ghair muakkada are those prayers which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed. Even though he did not perform it regularly or continuously, but he performed those prayers. Whereas nafil and optional prayers are those prayers which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not do himself. Now, I'll give you an example, as we're going to look at later. The 4 rakats before Asr, they are sunnat-e ghair muakkada, sunnahs which have not been emphasized by the Prophet or by the Sharia. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did mention about these sunnahs, and he sometimes prayed it. Whereas nafil is basically certain number of rakats a person desires to pray without any particular cause or without it being established from the Sharia. Now what I mean by that is, just say for example, somebody at 10 o'clock in the morning, he decides to pray 2 rakat nafil salah. 2 rakat salah. Now if that person who's praying the 2 rakat salah, if he made the intention of ishraq, if he made the intention of duha, then that's different. That's sunnat again muakkada. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed the salatul duha. However, if there is no intention for salatul duha, also salatul ishraq, but he just wants to pray 2 rakat prayers, then that prayer which he had prayed would be considered as nafil, would be considered as optional. So that is the the main difference between sunnat ghair muakkada and nafil prayers. But to tell the truth, when it comes to everyday usage, and when it comes to normally in books and so on, the word nafil is kind of used for sunnat ghair muakkada. They're kind of used for prayers. Any prayer which is not considered to be farz, the word tatawwu, the word nawafil is used. So this particular word nawafil or tatawwu, sometimes mentioned in the books of hadith, is very broadly used, and it can also mean prayers such as the 2 rakats fajr sunnah, which is considered to be an emphasized sunnah, but that can also be used, or the word tatawwu or nafil can be used to describe the 2 rakats fajr sunnah and for other sunnahs which are considered to be emphasized. Now this takes me on to the next point which I want to mention here, and that is, what is the reward, or what is the purpose of praying nafil salah and optional salah? Now the the reward or the purpose of praying nafil salah or optional salah is that by praying nafil salah, a person gains nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's mentioned in a hadith Qudsi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that a servant, it is through the optional prayers, it is through the nafil prayers, he gains nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not through the farz. Now the reason why is because when someone is praying farz, it could be so that he's praying it because he is forced to pray. He had no other alternative, but he had to pray the farz. However, nafil is something where there is no force. A person is doing it by himself. He's doing it out of his own accord. So because he's doing it by his own self, he's doing it out of his own accord, so therefore it is through the long optional prayers a person gains nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is one benefit or one reward of praying optional prayers. Another reward or another benefit of optional prayers, as mentioned in the hadith of Sunan Abu Dawood, is that optional prayers in the hereafter will be used, and these can also be found in Sahih al-Bukhari. The optional prayers will be used in the hereafter to compensate the lack of khushu', the lack of sincerity and ikhlas in one's prayer and in one's salah. As mentioned in the hadith, that what will happen on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question regarding the first prayers. And if there was any lack of sincerity in the first prayers, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then ask the angels that did this person have any nafil prayers and optional prayers. And if this person prayed optional prayers in abundance, then these optional prayers will be used to compensate the lack of khushu and sincerity and ikhlas which may have happened in one's first prayer. And sometimes when you're praying first, it does happen that sometimes your mind wanders off here and there. It shouldn't, But sometimes it happens, you think about worldly things, you think about dunyawi things. So what will happen is that if a person prayed nafil prayers and he prayed abundance of nafil prayers, then inshallah these nafil prayers would be used to compensate the lack of khushu, the lack of concentration in one's first prayer. Now let's have a look at the text which is in front of us, and accordingly I'll mention the relevant rulings. Imam Quduuri rahmatullahi goes on to say that as-sunnatu fi as-salah ay yusalli rak'atayn ba'da tulu'il fajr. That it is considered a sunnah in salah. So these are the sunnahs in salah. That ay yusalli rak'atayn, that one prays 2 rak'ats after the beginning of Fajr. So we're talking about the 2 rak'ats of Fajr Sunnah. Now let me mention a few things with regards to the 2 rak'ats of Fajr Sunnah. The 2 rak'ats of Fajr Sunnah, out of all the Sunnahs, are considered to be the most emphasized. There is a hadith which can be found in Sahih Muslim and also in Sunnah Abu Dawood. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that not to omit or not to leave out the 2 rak'ats of Fajr Sunnah, even though you're on the battlefield and you're being trampled by the horses, even then you should not leave the 2 rak'ats of Fajr Sunnah. So as we can see that there is a lot of emphasis regarding the 2 rak'ats of Fajr Sunnah. Now this takes me on to another issue, another ruling here, is just say for example somebody has come to the masjid and for Fajr prayer on about, he's come to the masjid and he finds that the Jamaat and the congregation has started. And he hasn't prayed his Fajr Sunnah yet. Now the question is that does he miss or omit the Fajr Sunnah and join the congregation, or does he pray the 2 rak'ats Fajr Sunnah and miss 1 rakat or even 2 rakats of the Fajr Farz? Now it's mentioned in the books of fiqh that if someone has come to the masjid and the Jamaat has already started and he is confident that he will be able to catch the Imam before he does Salam, before he finishes the Fajr congregation. So basically he'll be able to catch the Imam, say in the first rakat, second rakat, or even in the in the tashahhud position before the Imam goes into Salam. Then the ruling is that he should pray the Fajr 2 rakat Sunnah and then join the congregation. However, if he say arrived at the masjid and it's very very late, just say he's in the second rakat, the Imam, and obviously if he was to begin the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah, there's no way on earth he will be able to catch the Imam before the Imam does Salam. Then in that situation he will join the Imam in the congregation. And remember one thing here is that if you miss the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah and then you've joined the Imam in the congregation and in the Jamaat, after you prayed your Fajr Farz, it is not permissible for you to pray the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah. You're not allowed to pray the Fajr 2 rakat Sunnah. And this is something which is very important, because sometimes a lot of brothers, what they do is that they miss the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah, they join the Jamaat, they join the congregation, and then after they finish the Jamaat and congregation, they by themselves go to the back of the masjid, the corner of the masjid, and pray the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah. You're not allowed to do that, and the reason why is something which I mentioned in our last lesson, and that is that after the Fajr Farz prayer, it is makruh tahrimi and severely disliked to pray any optional prayers, any Sunnah prayers. So because because of this reason, one is not allowed to pray the 2 rakats Fajr Sunnah after the Fajr congregation has already been held. Even after sunrise, by the way, he's still not allowed to pray the Fajr 2 rakat sunnah, because you only pray the sunnah during its time. So when the sun rises, then the time has also gone, has also elapsed. So one again would not be able or would not be allowed to pray the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah. The only time, one additional masla here, is that the only time one will be allowed to do the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah is if somebody missed the Fajr farz and he or she is doing qadha of the farz prayer before Dhuhr of that day, before Zawal, before the Islamic midday, before Zawal of that particular day. Then in that situation, he or she will pray the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah first, and thereafterwards the 2 rakats Fajr farz. That is the only situation. If you've already prayed the farz, you can't do qadha of the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah. However, the only situation where you can pray the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah after sunrise, if somebody had also missed the Fajr farz, to say he overslept, he missed his Fajr, he woke up at 10 o'clock, and then he wants to pray his Fajr at that time, then in that situation he will be able to do the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah firstly, and thereafterwards the 2 rakats Fajr farz. Excuse me. So that is the first ruling. The next text then goes on to say وَأَرْبَعًا قَبْلَ الظُّهْرِ. The 4 rakats before the Dhuhr prayer is also considered to be an emphasized sunnah, is also considered to be a sunnat muakkada. 4 rakats before the Dhuhr prayer, that is considered to be sunnat muakkada. Now, just one ruling here, which is different to the rulings which I just mentioned with regards to the Fajr prayer, and that is that, as I mentioned, that if you've already prayed your Fajr farz, then you can't pray the 2 rakats Fajr sunnah afterwards. However, in Zuhur is slightly different. Why? Because after the Zuhur, you're allowed to pray sunnahs all the way up until Asr. So if somebody had missed the 4 rakats Zuhur sunnah before, and to say he arrived at the masjid, the Jamaat had already started, then in that situation, after the 4 rakat Zuhur farz, he will be allowed to pray the 4 rakat Zuhur sunnah. You could say that's the only situation one would be allowed to pray. You could also do it for the Isha as well, but that is the only situation where if somebody was to pray the 4 rakats, what I mean after the Isha, what I meant was that if in the Isha example, like if somebody missed the 4 rakats before Isha, one can also do the qadha. One can also read the 4 rakats, say, after Isha, but it will just be considered an optional prayer. But with regards to the Zuhur, if somebody was to miss the 4 rakats before Zuhur, and he prayed after the Zuhur, he would also get the same reward and the same thawab. But I also have to mention one point here, and that is that, remember, it's an emphasized sunnah to pray 4 rakats before Zuhur. So if somebody once or twice, say, just missed it, then fair enough. If he was to pray the 4 rakats after the Zuhur farz, then inshallah he will get the full reward and the full sawab. However, if someone habitually is missing the 4 rakats of Zuhur sunnah before the Zuhur prayer, then that will amount to a sin. Remember, the ruling regarding sunnat muakkada or emphasized sunnahs is that if somebody was to miss it out intentionally and regularly, then it becomes a sin. He gets a sin for that. He gets a guna for that. So similarly, the 4 rakats before Dhuhr, that is a sunnah, that you pray 4 rakats before Dhuhr. So if somebody once or twice missed it out of negligence or out of forgetfulness or was a bit late here and there, then understandable. But if somebody habitually is making a habit of coming late all the time, then it becomes a sin. So just keep that in mind. Next text then goes on to say وَرَقَعَتَيْنِ بَعْدَهَا, that it's also sunnat muakkada to pray 2 rakats after the Zuhur. وَأَرْبَعًا قَبْلَ الْعَصْرِ, and also to pray 4 rakats before the Asr prayer. وَإِنْ شَاءَ رَكْعَتَيْنِ, and if somebody wants, he can pray 2 rakats before. He then goes on to say, وَرَكْعَتَيْنِ بَعْدَ الْمَغْرِبِ, that it's a sunnah muakkada, it's an emphasized sunnah to pray 2 rakats after the Maghrib. وَأَرْبَعًا قَبْلَ الْإِشَاءِ, he then goes on to say, and to pray 4 rakats before the Isha Salah. وَبَعْدَهَا أَرْبَعًا وَإِنْ شَاءَ رَكْعَتَيْنِ, and also there is a choice that one after the Isha can pray 4 rakats, or if he wants, he can just suffice on 2 rakats. And this takes me on to very quickly an issue here regarding the 4 rakats before the Isha. Now, there isn't authentic hadith where it says that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed 4 rakats before Isha. It's not proven through any hadith quite clearly saying that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam praying 4 rakats before the Isha Salah. Now we derive the virtue or the permissibility of praying some form of Salah before the Isha from the hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kullu bayna al-azanaini salatun liman sha'a," which means that between 2 azans, i.e. between the azan and the iqamat for the salah, there is a salah for the person who wants. So what we're trying to say is that the Isha azan, and then in between the Isha azan and the Isha iqamat, there is a salah there for a person who wants to pray, i.e. there's an optional salah there. So keeping this in mind, we then derive its permissibility and its virtue to pray some form of salah before the Isha farz and before the Isha compulsory prayer. Which then takes me on to say that why then we in the Hanafi fiqh say that you should pray 4 rakats. Now when we look at the faraiz, besides Maghrib, but when we look at the faraiz, the compulsory number of rakats one has to pray in salah, and then when we look at the sunnahs, one prays before the compulsory rakats, we can derive that the number of rakats which are compulsory, the same number of rakats are also prayed before. So take an example for Fajr. So in Fajr, 2 rakats is farz and obligatory. So the sunnahs before is also 2 rakats. In the Zuhr Salah, 4 rakats is obligatory and farz to pray. So before the Zuhr, 4 rakats, sunnah. The same also goes for Asr, that 4 rakats, Asr is farz, and there are 4 rakats sunnah before. So keeping this in mind, the comparison or the analogy which we can draw is that for Isha, if it's 4 rakats farz, then there should be 4 rakats sunnah. However, as I probably mentioned before as well, that the importance of utilizing our time, the importance of making sure that we use every second of our life for the pleasure and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, if somebody comes to the masjid and he doesn't have time to pray 4 rakats before the Isha farz and obligatory prayer, what he can do the very least is at least pray 2 rakats Isha sunnah, and that would be sufficient, and that would be okay in terms of the reward and in terms of the sawab. The next couple of rulings then tells us about how many rakats one can pray, nafil rakats, nafil prayers. One can pray with 1 salam during the day and during the night. So it's mentioned that according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, he's of the view that the nafil prayers during the day, it is preferable that one prays 2 rakats bi taslimatin wahidatin, with one salam, i.e. prays the nafil in units of 2 rakats. He then goes on to say, وَإِنْ شَاءَ أَرْبَعًا, that if somebody wants, he can pray 4 rakats with one salam. So you can have the maximum you can pray, because Imam Abu Hanifa then goes on to say, وَيُكْرَهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ وَزِيَادَةُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ, which means that to pray more than that is considered to be disliked and makruh. So what what Imam Abu Hanifa is trying to say is that the most number of rakats one can pray with one salam is 4 rakats with one salam. It's preferable to pray in units of 2. However, the most one can pray with one salam is 4. And when it comes for nafil prayers, prayed during the night, whether it's tahajjud, whether it's qiyamul layl, then Imam Abu Hanifa is of the view that one can pray 8 rakats with one salam. So you can actually pray 8 rakats in one go. According to Imam Hanifa, that is permissible. And to pray anything more than that with one salam, i.e. 10 rakats with one salam, 12 rakats with one salam, then that is considered makruh, that is considered disliked. Then it goes on to say that وَقَالَ بِيُوسُفَ وَمُحَمْمَدْ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ, that Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad rahmatullah left the view that one should not pray more than 2 rakats at night time with one salam. Now it's mentioned that the fatwa, i.e. the opinion which we act upon, is given on the opinion of Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad rahmatullah alayh, in terms of they say that one should pray or one should not pray more than 4 rakats with one salam during the day and not more than 2 rakats with one salam during the night. I did put this question to one of my teachers, and he replied by saying that this fatwa, which can be found Raddul Muhtar and so on, is based upon preferability. Now, what is more preferable to do? So therefore, if someone was to read any number of rakats, optional prayers, more than one salam, i.e. like for example, in the night he prayed 8 rakats with one salam, or 6 rakats with one salam, or 4 rakats with one salam, then that would be considered permissible and that would be considered okay. So you can pray, because the ruling where it says that the fatwa is on Imam Yusuf's and Imam Muhammad's opinion, it's basically mainly based on what is considered to be preferable and what is considered to be desirable. However, if somebody didn't act upon the opinion and prayed 4 rakats with one salam during the night, then that is not considered to be disliked and it's not considered to be makruh. A couple of more rulings before we finish. The next batch, I'm not going to go into any detail because we've already looked at it before in the salah section, but just 1 or 2 things which regards to the nafil prayer. Now remember, if somebody started a nafil prayer, وَمَنْ دَخَلَ فِي صَلَاةِ النَّفْلِ ثُمَّ أَفْسَدَهَا فَقَضَاهَا, then according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh, it is considered wajib and obligatory to do qada and to repeat that nafil salah again. So even though it was optional, even though you didn't have to read this nafil or optional prayer, however, if somebody made the start of an optional prayer, he prayed 1 rakat and then he broke it in the middle, he will then have to do qada of the number of rakats he intended to pray. Another ruling is that this is like one of the flexibility of nafil and optional prayers, is that one can pray nafil prayers and optional prayers sitting down, even though he is capable of standing up and praying. Obviously, first prayer, again I mentioned this before, you have to stand up and pray. And if you sat down and prayed without any reason, then your salah and your namaz will not be done. But when it comes to optional prayers, when it comes to nafil prayers, you can actually sit down and pray even though you are capable of standing up. But the only difference is, as mentioned in the hadith of Sunnah Abu Dawood, you will only get half the reward and half the sawab. That's the only difference. You could say in a way like it's quite a big difference, but you only get half the reward and sawab. Why? Because there is more mujahada, more difficulty in praying standing up. So if somebody in a relaxed way sat down and prayed salah, he will still get the reward and sawab, but it will be half of what he would have got if he prayed standing up. And another ruling is that if someone is praying nafil salah, someone is traveling, he's outside the city, and he's on his camel, he's on his horse, or a modern day example, he's in his car, he can pray nafil salah whichever direction the car is traveling, i.e. even though it may be away from the qibla, it is permissible for him to pray the nafil salah. Let's say, for example, somebody's traveling from here, Birmingham to Manchester, so the car, the motorway, it's going in a northwardly direction, whereas the qibla is, say, in a southeasterly direction. So even though he's traveling upwards, northwards, he wants to pray nafil salah in the car, then his salah and his prayer would be done. So that's another flexibility with regards to the nafil optional prayer, that wherever you are traveling to, even though it may be totally away from the qibla, one is allowed to pray the nafil salah, and that nafil salah would be accepted by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll leave it there for this week. What we'll do in next week's lesson is I'll begin next week's lesson by looking at some optional prayers, some nafil prayers, which haven't been mentioned here in the book but can be found in the books of hadith, such as Salatul Duha, Tahajjud prayer, Salatul Tasbih, Awabin, and so on and so forth, and just say a few words and a few rulings with regards to them before we start the next section, which is with regards to Sajda Sahwa, i.e. the prostration for forgetfulness or the prostration for error. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act upon what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.